So women may expect their husbands to financially support the household, yes, but more women probably than ever before are actually capable in the United States today of doing just the same by the same standard. And up to a third of households today actually have their wives as the primary breadwinner. But who ends up making the financial decisions then? Before we go any further, if you are here, you should be subscribed to the channel and you should turn on notifications so that you never really miss another video. And of course, if you make it all the way through and you're just like, hey, I really actually like this video, like the video, and share it with your community. We're just trying to get the algorithm to recognize good content out here. It's not uncommon, it seems, to have clips or even just casual conversations perhaps. I don't know how widespread these anecdotes is, but it's not that uncommon to hear that there is an expectation from a wife that their husband will make at least twice as much as them. Now, this isn't necessarily the widest opinion, the most popular opinion, right? At the very least, there is an understanding of some expectation of financial support, whatever financial support means. But the concept, or at least a benchmark, let's say, of making twice as much doesn't just come out of nowhere. Husband head of household model is the most common in the United States, and it probably honestly has been since the country's founding. In the 1970s, women made around 60% of the earnings that a man made. A married woman actually only contributed around 25% of the total household income on average. So all of this in context gives some credence to why twice as much kind of has become a benchmark. One, to some extent, women were making basically half of what men were making at one point in time in the US. And the expectation that a man should make twice as much was probably more so akin to the expectation that a man should make the average of what men were making in the United States, and that any deviation from that, at least below, would be an indication of something going wrong, right? But the other thing is that consideration of marriage penalties and the wage gap. I go into more detail on the wage gap and the motherhood penalty in my video on whether or not the wage gap is due to not having enough women interested in science. For now, it's mostly necessary to just understand that when you become a mother, you typically see in the data that earnings fall and never really rise back up to where they were prior. Being a married woman would come with the expectation that you would at some point have to work less or bring in less money if the end goal was to have a nuclear family where there's a husband and wife and 2.5 kids, right? Well, somebody has to care for the 2.5 kids, so there is some built-in kind of protection for that in the idea of I need a man who's making twice as much, because when it is time for me to take up motherhood responsibilities, I'm going to have to most likely, based on if nothing else statistics, retract from the labor force a bit, and he will need to supply the majority of the income, and the only way to ensure that is to at least make sure that at this point he can make twice as much as I can make. So that's a 1970s situation, but let's fast forward to 2010. In 2010, wives contribute around a third of total household earnings. We're talking about women making around 77% of the income that a man makes. Today, that number has gone up to 83%. So we're really in a different environment than the one that kind of led to the thinking of I need a man who's making twice as much as me. At this point, men on average are not making twice as much as women are. Listen, it's not the 70s anymore. But what would be an interesting thought experiment is what would you need to do to be the man who's making twice as much as the average woman? In today's economy, only professionals are really making twice as much as the average woman. Actually, if you look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data on weekly earnings, to make twice as much as the average woman in the United States, you would have to make around $1,800 per week. Do you know who is making $1,800 per week? I'll give you a little bit of a hint. Only the top 8% of male earners in the United States are making over $1,800 per week. To be fair, it's really $1,780. Now, what are they doing? Well, they're software developers, doctors, not academic PhD doctors, which I'm not one either, but not those kind of doctors. They're actually like cut open people and prescribe drugs doctors. They're MDs. They're software developers. They're MDs. They're lawyers. They are tech infrastructure managers. These are the most professional professionals. So really, unless you are only aiming to marry one of these software developers turned YouTube stars, you're going to be very unlikely to find anybody making twice as much as you as the average woman in the United States seeking an average man. It's either Jarvis Johnson or no one. If you were to really apply, though, the logic of the 1970s, right? So let's not even say twice as much, because that's clearly logical, because the average woman is not going to get one of the top 8% of earning males in the US. If you do, great, good for you. But for the majority of people who just are not going to end up even in the same room as one of these people, what would be a logical application of the thought process from the 1970s? In the 1970s, it was that you need someone who is going to be able to effectively compensate or handle a motherhood penalty. Today, you'd probably be looking for a man who's at least making as much as you. It's probably the better terminology, because the wage gap now is really still double digits, but not 60 cents on every dollar, right? There is still a motherhood penalty, but we have ways today to deal with that aren't necessarily just financial in terms of making more money. The other complicating part is that most of the wage growth since the 1970s actually has accrued to women entering the workforce. So the 1970s male that the average one was thinking of then and their earning potential, that same male has nowhere near the same earning potential today, in large part because a lot of the jobs that male was depending upon, in particular manufacturing, and manufacturing that didn't require that much education, is now gone. So the same male with the same socioeconomic traits is probably making less now than the average woman is today. And this is probably why you're seeing a new trend today where more women than probably ever before are actually the primary breadwinner in their household. In the 1970s, it was around 4% of husbands who were married to a wife who earned more than them. By 2007, though, that 4% grew to 22% of husbands. Today, or at least 2017, which is around the latest data that we have, that number is around 28% of men who have a wife who earns more than them. And if you are considering pay parity as well, couples where the male and the female are earning effectively the same amount of money, then you're actually looking at closer to around 31% of households in the United States in 2017 where there was at least equal pay between the couples, or the wife earned more than the husband. Whatever you may think of how this dynamic is shifting things, one thing is a little bit clearer. It's at least to some extent to the benefit of the wife that there are more households today where wives are the primary breadwinners. Turns out that financial decision making, the final say on what gets purchased in the household, is more likely to skew in the direction of either an equal share between partners in terms of financial say, or the wife. If you are talking about households where wives earn more than their husbands, is really becoming more who ends up sharing the legs of the pants in the house as we move further and further away from a society where men are dominating the workforce and dominating earnings. So if you liked that video, if you found it informative, if you felt like it helped you understand the world just a little bit better, like the video. That's all. Just like the video. Comment below too if you'd like. The algorithm would love you too. And of course, I would definitely love for you to share this with your circle. Does anybody in your circle actually think that wives are always looking for husbands who make twice as much as them, even today? You probably want to let them know they're never going to find a husband. Make sure that you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that you know when I'm publishing the newest videos, so you never miss any of these little gems ever again. So until next time.